Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. Arrival on Altheria Prime. The Altherian Council chamber hummed with tension. A holographic projection of a sleek human spacecraft hovered above the center of the circular room, its design sleek and alien even to the galaxy's most advanced engineers. The humans had finally accepted the Altherians' invitation to join the Interstellar Coalition, a move that excited some and terrified others. Councillor Villuin, a distinguished Altherian with skin that shimmered like polished opal, addressed the assembly. Let us proceed cautiously. Humans are unconventional. Their biology, their technology, even their psychology defy standard classification. Unconventional, scoffed Councillor Cichlar, whose serpentine features curled in amusement. They are barbaric. What species invents weapons of mass destruction before unifying their own planet? The doors to the chamber hissed open, cutting off further debate. Two humans stepped inside, Captain Elena Markov, a tall woman with commanding blue eyes, and Dr. Julian Ortega, a scientist whose curious gaze flitted around the room like a child in a candy store. Behind them trailed the subject of the Council's most recent debate, a creature that humans referred to as the Sandrunner, an animal that bore a striking resemblance to the legendary sandworms of the ancient Altherian desert myths. The Sandrunner, a juvenile just over 2 meters long, slithered gracefully, its segmented, armored body undulating with a soft chittering sound. It was a marvel, its presence both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Villuin cleared his throat. Welcome, representatives of humanity. And, your companion? His voice faltered at the end as the Sandrunner coiled itself at Elena's feet like an oversized pet. Elena offered a diplomatic smile. Counselors, thank you for hosting us. This is Titan. He's harmless, mostly. Julian chimed in. We brought him because we thought the Altherians would appreciate his cultural significance. You see, on Earth he's inspired countless myths and stories. He's even a symbol of resilience and adaptability. Councillor Cichlar leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Adaptability, you say? Your creature's anatomy resembles that of our extinct desert kings. But those were monstrous beasts, predators of the highest order. How did humanity domesticate such a thing? Julian grinned. Domesticated might be a stretch. They're still dangerous in the wild, but we've worked out a mutually beneficial relationship. Titan here helps us explore harsh terrains on planets like Altheria Prime. Cichlar's skepticism deepened. And what prevents it from turning on you? Or worse, escaping into the wild and wreaking havoc? Elena exchanged a glance with Julian. We have ways of ensuring loyalty, she said cryptically. The council murmured amongst themselves, but their conversation was cut short by an alarm. The holographic projection of the human spacecraft flickered, replaced by a distress signal. This is Orbital Station Arilos. Unidentified creatures are attacking the outer perimeter. Requesting immediate assistance. Villuin turned to the humans, his expression grave. Captain Markov, Dr. Ortega, if your Sandrunnering is as adaptable as you claim, perhaps it's time to prove it. The journey to Orbital Station Arilos was a whirlwind. Titan, secured in a specialized harness, curled beside Elena and Julian in the shuttle. Think he's ready for this? Julian asked, patting Titan's armored flank. Elena smirked. He's been through worse. When they arrived at the station, chaos greeted them. Swarms of arachnoid creatures, each the size of a human torso, skittered across the station's hull, tearing at its defenses with razor-sharp mandibles. The station's personnel were barely holding them back. Titan uncoiled, his chittering intensifying as he sensed the danger. Elena clipped a device onto his harness, a neural interface that allowed limited communication between human and beast. You ready, big guy? She murmured. Titan hissed in response, his body vibrating with anticipation. As the airlock opened, Elena and Julian stepped aside to let Titan surge forward. The Sandrunner moved like a living missile, his segmented body coiling and snapping as he tore through the arachnoid swarm. His armored plates deflected their attacks, and his powerful jaws crushed their exoskeletons with ease. The Altherian defenders watched in stunned silence as the humans' pets turned the tide of the battle. This is what humanity brings to the table, Elena said to Villuin over the comms. Unconventional solutions for unconventional problems. As the battle ended and the surviving creatures retreated into the void, Titan returned to the shuttle, his body streaked with ichor but his spirit undiminished. He coiled around Elena protectively, his massive eyes scanning the room for threats. Councillor Villuin, having arrived to witness the aftermath, approached cautiously. Captain Markov, your Sandrunner has proven itself remarkable. But I must ask, what happens when it grows to full size? Can humanity control something that could rival a dreadnought in scale? Julian chuckled nervously. We're working on that. Viluan's expression darkened. Work faster. For all our sakes. As the shuttle departed the station, Elena glanced at Julian. Think they'll let us stick around? Julian grinned. They'd be fools not to. But let's hope they don't find out about the other experiments back on Earth. Titan chittered softly, his eyes glowing with an intelligence that seemed just a little too keen. The secrets of Sandrunners. The human shuttle returned to the Altherian capital with a quiet hum, the stars outside streaking into brilliant lines as they entered the atmosphere. Titan rested in a coiled heap, his armored segments shimmering faintly under the cabin's lights. Captain Elena Markov and Dr. Julian Ortega sat across from each other, their faces set in contemplation. You know they're going to probe, Elena said finally, her voice low but firm. They're intrigued now, but it won't take long for curiosity to turn into suspicion. Julian tapped on his datapad, which displayed Titan's biometric readings from the recent skirmish. Let them probe. Titan's unique, sure, but we're not lying when we say he's a cooperative companion. Elena raised an eyebrow. He's cooperative because he knows he's being monitored. Without the neural interface, we're dealing with an apex predator that can tunnel through rock, digest metal, and grow to rival the largest earthbound organisms. This isn't just a diplomatic asset, Julian, it's a ticking time bomb. Julian smiled faintly. That's why we're the ones holding the remote detonator. The conversation ended as the shuttle docked. Altherian Counselor Viluan was waiting for them at the terminal, flanked by an honor guard of luminescent Altherians who moved with almost serpentine grace. Humans, Viluan said in his usual measured tone, your demonstration at Orbital Station Arilos was compelling. The Council has questions. The Council chamber was more crowded than before, filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Holographic projections of the battle against the arachnoid swarm floated in the air, the scene slowed to emphasize Titan's brutal efficiency. Counselor Sichlar was the first to speak. Explain this Sandrunner in detail. What are its origins? How does humanity control such a beast? And more importantly, how do we ensure that it doesn't become a threat to the coalition? Julian stood, datapad in hand. The Sandrunner, or Harpax Serini, is an artificially enhanced subspecies of Earth's annelid class. Its ancestors were much smaller, simpler creatures that lived in sandy environments. Through a combination of genetic engineering and selective breeding, we've developed a species that can thrive in extreme conditions, acting as both a scout and a defender for human expeditions. The room buzzed with whispers. Sichlar interrupted, her eyes narrowing. Artificially enhanced? What guarantees do we have that this creature won't evolve into something uncontrollable? Life finds a way, does it not? Julian's smile faltered for a moment. That's why we've integrated neural interfaces. The Sandrunner's higher cognitive functions are linked to a human handler. Without input from the interface, they're intelligent but instinct-driven, not capable of independent strategic thinking. Viluan tilted his head. And what of its potential growth? The specimen we've seen is formidable, but records suggest it's far from fully mature. What happens when it reaches its peak size? Elena stepped forward. At full size, a Sandrunner can grow up to 20 meters long. However, their growth is controlled through environmental and dietary constraints. In controlled conditions, they remain manageable. Manageable? Sichlar's voice rose in skepticism. You speak as though your species has tamed a force of nature. After hours of grilling, the council dismissed the humans, promising to deliberate further. As they walked back to their quarters, Julian whispered, "Think they bought it?" "Not completely," Elena replied. "But they're intrigued enough to keep us around. For now." Inside their quarters, Titan rested on a platform designed to support his weight, his chittering soft and rhythmic. Julian sat at his workstation, pulling up encrypted files from a hidden database. "While we've got a breather, we need to talk about the other data," Julian said, his tone unusually serious. Elena joined him, scanning the screen. "What's this?" "The data we've been hiding from the council. The truth about Sandrunner behavior in the wild. Look." The screen displayed footage from a human research outpost on a desolate planet. In the video, a fully grown Sandrunner, easily 20 meters long, dug through the planet's crust with terrifying speed. But what caught Elena's attention was its coordination. The Sandrunner wasn't acting alone. It worked alongside others of its kind, communicating through vibrations and high-pitched frequencies. They're pack hunters, Julian said grimly. In the wild, they form hierarchies. Titan might look like a lone creature now, but he's genetically programmed to seek out others if he ever senses their presence. Elena's jaw tightened. And if he finds them? They'll form a swarm. It won't be anything like the arachnoids we fought earlier. A sandrunner swarm is an apex-level ecological event. Entire ecosystems would be consumed in days. Why wasn't this in the official briefing? Julian hesitated. Because the higher-ups thought it would cause unnecessary alarm. They believe the neural interfaces and containment measures are enough to keep things under control. Elena's fists clenched. Unnecessary alarm? Julian, if the Altherians find out we've been withholding this, they'll see it as a betrayal. We need to come clean. A loud chittering interrupted her. They turned to see Titan, his body vibrating with a new intensity. His eyes glowed faintly and his head tilted toward the far wall. What's he doing? Julian asked, alarmed. Elena stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. Titan? What is it? Titan hissed, the sound deeper than usual. He coiled tightly, his gaze fixed on something neither of them could see. Julian checked the neural interface. He's picking up vibrations. From below us. Below? Elena repeated, her heart sinking. Before they could react, the ground trembled. A distant rumble echoed through the base, growing louder with each passing second. Julian paled. Oh no. He's found them. The tremors intensified and cracks began to form in the floor. Titan surged forward, his movements urgent and almost frantic. Elena, if there's a wild swarm down there. I know, she snapped. We need to stop it before the Altherians figure out what's happening. The ground buckled beneath them, and a deafening roar filled the air as the first signs of something massive broke through the floor. Titan hissed in response, his body coiling protectively around his human companions. Elena grabbed a communicator. Get me Vieluin. Now. This was no longer about diplomacy. This was survival. Beneath the surface. The floor of the human quarters split with a deafening crack, throwing Elena and Julian off their feet. Titan hissed and reared, his segmented body coiling tightly as his glowing eyes fixed on the widening fissure. The rumble beneath them wasn't just tectonic, it was alive. Titan, stay. Elena shouted, grabbing Julian by the arm and pulling him away from the collapsing section of the room. Through the fissure, something massive shifted, displacing the ground. A flash of iridescent chitin gleamed in the faint light before disappearing into shadow. What the hell was that? Julian gasped, his voice trembling. Wild sandrunner, Elena said grimly. And by the sound of it, not alone. Titan hissed louder, his body vibrating with energy as he backed toward the humans. It was a protective gesture, but the tremors in his movements betrayed something else. Fear. Elena hit her communicator. Villain, this is Captain Markov. We have a situation beneath the base. Potentially hostile life forms, highly dangerous. We need reinforcements and containment protocols ASAP. Villain's voice crackled through. What sort of life forms? Are you certain this isn't related to your companion? Elena hesitated. It's complicated. Just get people down here. The line went dead, but she didn't have time to dwell on the Altherian's response. A guttural roar erupted from the fissure, followed by the emergence of a colossal sandrunner, at least 3 times Titan's size. Its armored body shimmered in the dim light, and its massive mandibles clicked with unsettling precision. Elena and Julian froze. Titan, however, surged forward, hissing furiously at the intruder. Titan, no. Elena shouted, but it was too late. Titan launched himself at the larger creature, his smaller size offset by speed and precision. The 2 sandrunners collided with a metallic screech, their armored plates grinding against each other as they wrestled. Julian, we need to move, Elena said, grabbing his arm. But Titan? They raced down the corridor, alarms blaring throughout the facility. The tremors followed them, each one growing stronger as more sandrunners began to surface. Elena's communicator crackled again, this time with Vieluin's voice. Captain Markov, we're detecting multiple breaches in the subterranean levels. Explain? Elena didn't slow down as she replied, your planet has a dormant population of sandrunners, and Titan just triggered them. You brought this upon us? Vieluin's tone was sharp with accusation. We didn't know they were here, she snapped. Look, we need to contain this now. Do you have any heavy artillery? Any containment tech? As they reached the command chamber, it was clear that chaos was spreading. Holographic displays showed live footage of sandrunners bursting from the ground across the city, their immense forms weaving through the streets as citizens fled. Vieluin stood at the center of the room, surrounded by Altherian strategists. His usually composed face was drawn with tension. "Captain," he said as Elena and Julian approached, "this infestation threatens the entire planet. Your Titan seems to have some connection to these creatures. Can he help us stop them?" Julian hesitated. In theory, Titan might be able to assert dominance over the swarm. Sandrunners operate on a hierarchical system. If Titan can establish himself as the alpha, the others might follow his lead. And if he cannot? Viluin asked, his opalescent eyes narrowing. Elena's jaw tightened. "Then we're looking at a planetary evacuation." Viluin's expression darkened. "Unacceptable. Altheria Prime is our ancestral home. We will not abandon it." Finding Titan wasn't difficult. The sounds of his battle with the larger Sandrunner echoed through the corridors. When they arrived, they found Titan bloodied but still fighting. The larger Sandrunner had pinned him briefly but was forced to release him when Titan sunk his mandibles into one of its vulnerable joints. "We have to help him," Julian said. Elena looked around, spotting a series of heavy-duty plasma cannons mounted on the walls. "We don't need to take down the big one, just weaken it enough for Titan to take control." She activated the nearest console, overriding the controls to aim the cannons manually. "Julian, get to the other side and do the same." "I'll cover you." Julian hesitated, then nodded and sprinted to the other console. Elena lined up the shot, aiming for the larger Sandrunner's midsection. With a deep hum, the cannon fired, a burst of blue plasma slamming into the creature's armored plates. It roared in pain, staggering back. "Julian now?" Elena shouted. Julian's cannon fired, striking the creature's side. The combined assault was enough to knock it off balance, giving Titan the opening he needed. The victory was short-lived. More Sandrunners were surfacing, their vibrations echoing through the facility. But instead of attacking, they hesitated, their movements uncertain as they watched Titan. Julian's eyes widened. "He's doing it. He's establishing dominance." Elena activated her communicator. "Viluin, the situation's stabilizing. Titan's asserting control over the swarm." The Altherian leader's voice was cautious. "And if he loses control?" 4 hours, Titan stood at the center of the swarm, his body vibrating with complex signals. The other Sandrunners responded in kind, their aggression fading as they settled into a loose formation around him. Julian monitored the neural interface, his brow furrowed. He's not just communicating, he's directing them. They're listening to him. Elena watched in awe. Titan's not just an asset. He's the key to coexisting with these creatures. Viluin entered the room, his expression unreadable. "You've stabilized the immediate threat, but this is far from over. What happens when Titan leaves? Or if he decides to challenge us?" Julian spoke cautiously. "We need to study this phenomenon further. With Titan's help, we might be able to develop a system to manage the Sandrunners long-term." Viluin nodded slowly. "Very well. But understand this, humans, if your creature ever turns against us, the consequences will be severe." Elena met his gaze. "Understood. But for now, Titan's proven he's more than a threat. He's a bridge between our species and theirs. Let's make the most of it." Titan hissed softly, his glowing eyes scanning the room as if he understood every word. The swarm's secrets. The Altherian capital had settled into an uneasy calm. The city's shimmering spires, once symbols of unshakable strength, now bore the scars of the Sandrunner incursion. Although Titan had asserted dominance over the swarm, the Altherians remained on edge. The streets were largely deserted, save for military patrols and roving drones scanning for further breaches. Inside the Altherian research facility, Elena, Julian, and Viluin stood around a holographic projection of the Sandrunner swarm's movements. Titan, coiled and resting nearby, emitted occasional low vibrations that resonated through the room. "We've mapped the tunnels they've created," Julian said, highlighting a sprawling network beneath the city. "It's massive. These aren't just random burrows, they're coordinated. Structured." Viluin studied the projection with narrowed eyes. "This suggests intelligence beyond what you've claimed. Why didn't humanity share this information before introducing one of these creatures to our planet?" Elena crossed her arms, her face taut with tension. "Because we didn't know they were here. On Earth, Sandrunners evolved in isolation. The network-building behavior you're seeing might be unique to this population." Viluin's opalescent gaze lingered on her, unreadable. "Or your species has underestimated them entirely." Julian intervened, tapping his datapad. "There's something else. The vibrations Titan and the others are emitting, they're more than just communication. They're broadcasting at a frequency that resonates with the planet itself." Viluin straightened, his expression shifting from skepticism to alarm. Explain? Julian magnified a segment of the holographic projection. The Altherian crust is rich in a mineral, harmonite, I think you called it? Its crystalline structure amplifies vibrations. The Sandrunners are using it to extend their communication range. But it's not just that. He adjusted the display, revealing seismic activity patterns overlapping the tunnels. Their movements are destabilizing the crust. If they keep expanding the network, they could trigger a chain reaction. Planetary quakes, collapses, maybe worse. Villain's voice was cold. Are you saying these creatures could destroy our world? Not intentionally, Julian said quickly. But the potential is there. Elena stepped forward, her tone firm. Then we need to act. Titan's influence gives us a window of opportunity. We can guide the swarm, redirect their efforts to less critical areas. But we'll need cooperation from your forces to pull it off. Villain's gaze flicked to Titan, who seemed to be listening intently despite his apparent rest. And if your creature loses control? What happens then? A joint task force was assembled within hours. Human engineers, Altherian scientists, and a contingent of armed guards. Their mission was to descend into the tunnels and deploy harmonic dampeners, devices designed to disrupt the Sandrunners' communication frequencies. The hope was to localize the swarm's activity, preventing further destabilization. Titan led the way, his massive form moving with fluid grace through the dark, winding tunnels. Elena and Julian followed closely, their helmets' lights cutting through the gloom. Behind them, Viluan and the Altherian guards moved in formation, their sleek weapons glowing faintly. As they ventured deeper, the temperature rose, and the walls began to glimmer with veins of harmonite. The air was thick with vibrations, a constant hum that seemed to resonate in their bones. Julian paused to examine a cluster of harmonite crystals. The Sandrunners have been mining this stuff. Look at how clean the cuts are, like they've been using tools. They are the tools, Elena said, gesturing to Titan, whose mandibles scraped against the rock as he moved. Viluan crouched beside Julian, his expression grim. This mineral is sacred to my people. It's the foundation of our technology, our culture. If these creatures consume it indiscriminately? The group eventually reached a massive chamber, its walls encrusted with harmonite crystals that pulsed faintly as if alive. The vibrations here were almost deafening, and the team had to adjust their equipment to filter out the noise. At the center of the chamber lay the heart of the swarm. Dozens of Sandrunners coiled and writhed around a structure that defied explanation. It appeared organic, yet mechanical, a towering construct of harmonite and bioorganic material. Julian's jaw dropped. Is that a transmitter? Viluan's eyes narrowed. A transmitter for what? Titan hissed, his body vibrating in a pattern that seemed almost reverent. Elena raised her weapon instinctively. Julian, what are we looking at? He scanned the structure with his datapad. It's emitting a signal, a powerful one. If I'm reading this right, it's not just resonating with the planet. It's broadcasting into space. Viluan's expression darkened. You're saying these creatures are calling for something? Panic rippled through the group. If the Sandrunners were attempting to contact something, or someone, beyond Altheria Prime, the consequences could be catastrophic. We need to shut it down, Viluan said, his voice brooking no argument. Wait, Julian protested. We don't know what we're dealing with. If we destroy it, we could destabilize the entire swarm, or worse, trigger whatever it's trying to summon. Viluan turned to Elena. Your species brought this to us. You will fix it? Elena looked at Titan, who was still focused on the transmitter. We need to find a way to neutralize it without provoking the swarm. Julian tapped on his datapad frantically. If we can reprogram the harmonic dampeners, we might be able to disrupt the signal without destroying the structure. But I'll need time. As Julian worked, Elena kept her weapon trained on the swarm. The Sandrunners were agitated, their movements becoming more erratic as the vibrations shifted. Titan remained still, his massive form positioned between the humans and the swarm. Julian, hurry up, Elena muttered. I'm going as fast as I can, he snapped, his hands flying over the controls. Viluan watched the scene with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Your creature seems conflicted. Are you sure he's on your side? Elena didn't look away from the swarm. Titan knows who his allies are. The ground began to shake more violently as the transmitter's signal intensified. Julian? Elena shouted. Almost there, he yelled back. Finally, Julian slammed his hand on the device. Got it. Dampeners are online. A wave of counter-vibrations rippled through the chamber, drowning out the transmitter's signal. The Sandrunners recoiled, their movements slowing as the vibrations faded. The swarm began to retreat, burrowing back into the tunnels as if called away. Titan remained, his eyes fixed on the now silent transmitter. Veluin approached the structure cautiously. "You've stopped it? For now." Julian exhaled in relief. "We need to study this thing, figure out where that signal was going and what it was calling." Veluin turned to Elena. "Your creature saved us, but your species' recklessness nearly doomed us." "This isn't over, Captain." Elena nodded grimly. "I know. Whatever this is, it's bigger than any of us." Titan let out a low, mournful hiss, his massive frame slumping as if he, too, understood the weight of what had just transpired. The reckoning. The silence in the chamber was overwhelming. With the transmitter disabled and the swarm retreating, the tension in the air was almost palpable. Titan, his body still radiating faint vibrations, remained watchful over the group, as if ensuring that no further threats would emerge. Elena and Julian were still processing the events that had unfolded in the depths of Altheria Prime. But there was one certainty now: the Sandrunners weren't simply mindless creatures. They had a purpose, one that transcended what anyone had imagined. Veluin's voice broke through the stillness. "What happens now?" Elena exhaled slowly, turning toward him. "We need to understand what the Sandrunners were trying to contact. The transmitter wasn't just sending out a distress signal. It was calling something. We can't afford to ignore that." Julian, still examining his data pad, nodded in agreement. "And we need to make sure that the transmitter's destruction didn't cause any unforeseen consequences. The Sandrunners might retreat, but they'll adapt. They always do." Veluin's sharp gaze flicked to Titan. "This creature. Your species relies on this creature, yet it is not native to our planet. You've put us at risk by bringing it here." Elena stepped forward, her voice steady but resolute. "We didn't bring it here intentionally, Veluin. But Titan is not the enemy. He's the only reason we're standing here right now. Without him, the Sandrunners would have overrun this city." Veluin's expression hardened. "Perhaps. But that doesn't change the fact that this creature is an unknown. And unknowns are dangerous." "We've made our choice," Julian replied, his voice cool. "And I think Titan's proven his value." Back on the surface, the air was thick with unease. The once glittering city had become a war zone, its streets now crawling with armed Altherian soldiers, drones surveying the damage and scientists working to contain the breaches that the Sandrunners had created. But beneath all the urgency there was a deeper, more insidious feeling. It was as if something had changed in the very fabric of Altheria Prime. Something had been awakened. Elena, Julian, and Veluin stood together in a war room, surrounded by a dozen Altherian officials and strategists. On the large central display, the map of the planet's underground tunnels had expanded to reveal a far more disturbing pattern. Large areas beneath the surface were now blank, dead zones where all communication signals had gone dark. "The swarm was heading into these regions," Julian said, pointing at the empty areas on the map. "We thought the tunnels were just erratic, but now I think there's a bigger structure down there. A control center, maybe, something coordinating the entire network." Veluin's lips tightened. "Or a communication hub. But it's not just the swarm we need to worry about. If they're broadcasting into space, what if they're not alone?" Elena looked at the map, her brow furrowing. "We need to find that hub. Whatever the Sandrunners were contacting, it's still out there. And if they weren't just calling for reinforcements, we could be facing something much worse." Julian's voice dropped, his face pale. "Something's been lying dormant for a very long time. And it's waiting for the signal." Veluin turned toward them. "I'll assemble a team to track these dead zones. He hesitated. "You've gained the trust of these creatures. It might be time to see just how far that influence can go." Once again the team descended into the bowels of Altheria Prime, Titan leading the way. His massive body moved through the tunnels with an uncanny familiarity, almost as if he had been here before. The further they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air felt heavy, thick with static, as if the entire planet itself was holding its breath. As they moved deeper into the tunnel system, the vibrations from Titan became more erratic. The Sandrunners, now organized in a much larger group, scuttled around them, their glowing eyes fixed on Titan. For the first time since they had encountered the creatures, Elena felt a hint of unease. They were no longer just passive participants, they were aware. Titan had established his dominance, but something felt different now. Julian kept his eyes on the readouts on his datapad, which flickered occasionally as though struggling to maintain a connection. "The signal's getting stronger. We're getting close." Titan's low hisses echoed through the corridor, and the Sandrunners around them began to move with more purpose. They were nearing the source. And then they reached it. The chamber was massive, far larger than any tunnel or cavern they had previously encountered. The walls were lined with harmonite, but they were not the usual rough, jagged forms. Instead, the crystals had been meticulously arranged in intricate patterns, pulsing with an eerie glow. In the center of the room was an enormous structure, a towering mass of harmonite and organic material. At its heart was a colossal crystal, its surface reflecting light in unnatural ways as if it were alive. The vibrations in the air intensified, resonating in a low hum that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. "This is it," Julian said softly, awe in his voice. "This is the control center." Titan moved forward, his form bristling with energy. The sandrunners that had followed them now gathered around the central crystal, their movements synchronized as if they were waiting for something. Elena's hand rested on her weapon, but she knew there was no immediate threat. Titan was in command here, and the sandrunners were only acting on instinct. Still, she felt the tension and electric charge hanging in the air. "This is no ordinary hive," Hulud murmured, his eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and dread. This structure is ancient. It's not just a transmitter. It's a command center." Julian's face paled as he inspected the crystal. "It's not just controlling the sandrunners. It's feeding off the planet's energy. The harmonite, it's linking to something. It's a power source but also a catalyst. Whatever is in there." His voice trailed off as if he couldn't quite bring himself to say it. Elena took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing. "Then it's true. They weren't just trying to contact reinforcements. They were trying to awaken something. And I think they've succeeded." Titan's body twitched, his mandibles clicking in a low warning as the energy in the chamber intensified. Something was coming. And it was not of this world. The awakening. The low hum of the crystal in the center of the chamber deepened, resonating through the very core of the planet. Titan's body vibrated in synchrony with the pulse, his antennae twitching in irritation as though he, too, could sense the rising intensity of the energy. The sandrunners around the chamber moved in perfect synchrony, their bodies undulating and vibrating as if they were drawn into a shared trance. Their focus was entirely on the crystal, their collective consciousness converging on the monolith of harmonite that seemed to be calling to them. Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Julian, what the hell is happening?" Julian stood frozen, his datapad flashing with erratic readings. The usual signals were all but gone, replaced with a violent spike of energy that rattled his bones. His eyes darted over the readings, but they didn't make sense. This isn't just a communication signal. It's a beacon, a signal for something much more powerful, something capable of manipulating not just the sandrunners but the entire planet's energy systems. "What's drawing them in?" Hulud's voice, thick with dread, interrupted. The Altherian leader was no longer calm, no longer the cool, calculating official. There was fear in his eyes as he stared at the pulsating crystal. "I think it's them," Julian whispered. "I think the sandrunners were calling out to something buried deep beneath this planet, something far older and far more dangerous than anything we've ever imagined." Titan's mandibles clicked sharply, and for the first time since their arrival, Elena saw a flicker of fear in his glowing eyes. He took a cautious step forward, his massive legs moving with deliberate intent as if sensing the power coalescing at the center of the chamber. But as Titan moved, the crystal pulsed again, sending a burst of energy that shook the entire cavern. The sound of a massive tremor reverberated through the floor, the ceiling above them creaking and groaning, as though the entire structure of the planet was beginning to wake up. Small cracks appeared in the walls, revealing more of the glowing harmonite veins embedded deep within the stone. The ground beneath them seemed to shift, as if the very crust of Altheria Prime was shifting to align with the signal. "What the hell is that?" Elena's voice was a mix of awe and terror as she grabbed Julian's arm, pulling him backward toward Titan, whose protective stance had now turned defensive. In the distance, deep within the shadowed recesses of the chamber, something began to stir. The first hints of movement were subtle, just a flicker in the darkness, but then as the pulse grew louder they emerged, a shape, massive and unnatural. As the light from the crystal flickered and pulsed, Elena's eyes widened with disbelief. The creature that slithered into view was a towering behemoth, its long segmented body covered in scales that glimmered like the surface of the ocean. It was enormous, its head alone was the size of a small building, and its eyes, cold and alien, glowed with an eerie blue light. The creature's limbs were clawed, and its tail lashed with unsettling force, sending debris scattering in every direction. "What is that?" Julian gasped. Hulud stepped back, his eyes wide with recognition. "By the gods, that thing, it's an ancient..." "An ancient?" Elena echoed, glancing between Viluin and Julian. What the hell is that? Viluin swallowed hard, his voice shaking. It's what the Sandrunners were calling. This creature, this is a force of destruction. The ancients are part of Altheria's myth. We believe them extinct for millennia. Elena's heart raced. You've got to be kidding me. That's a myth? And it's real? Viluin turned his attention back to the massive creature, now fully emerged from the shadows, its body writhing and stretching as it adjusted to the chamber's energy. This isn't just a myth. The ancients were a race of beings that once ruled over Altheria. They harnessed the planet's energy, controlling the Harmonite in ways we could never comprehend. They were wiped out in a war with the early Altherians, a war that nearly destroyed the planet. But why is it here now? Julian asked, his voice tight with confusion and fear. It's calling to the Sandrunners, Viluin explained, his eyes still fixed on the creature. The Sandrunners are their descendants. They were meant to awaken this being when the time was right, when the planet's energy was once again aligned. And it seems that time has come. The ground beneath them trembled again, and the creature let out a guttural roar, a sound that shook the walls and made the air vibrate with an unsettling resonance. The Sandrunners began to scatter and shift around the creature, almost in worship as if they were drawing power from it. The chamber itself seemed to respond, the crystals on the walls beginning to hum in unison with the massive being. Do you think it's alive? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not just alive, Viluin responded. It's a force of nature. It feeds off the planet's energy, and when it awakens, it will return to its old ways. It will lay waste to this world, consume everything in its path. Julian stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the creature. But how do we stop it? Titan took a slow, deliberate step forward, his mandibles clicking in challenge. The creature, sensing the presence of the Sandrunner king, turned its massive head toward him, its eyes narrowing in recognition. Titan's own movements became tense, his posture defensive but unwavering. The two beings locked eyes as though measuring each other's strength. A low growl rumbled in Titan's throat. Titan, Elena murmured, her voice filled with both admiration and fear. You think you can fight it? Titan's low hum vibrated in response, and for a moment, Elena swore she saw an expression of defiance in his gaze. He was ready to face the ancient. But the problem was far greater than one creature, even one as powerful as Titan. The very energy of the planet was feeding this being, and in its wake, destruction would follow. Viluin's eyes flicked to the massive creature. We can't fight this. We need to stop the energy flow to it, sever the connection between the crystal and the planet's core. Julian nodded rapidly. We need to disrupt the energy before it reaches a critical mass. The Sandrunners are still tied to it. If we can break their connection, maybe we can halt the creature's growth. Then let's move quickly, Elena said, turning to Viluin. Where do we begin? Viluin pointed to the massive crystal at the center of the chamber. That is the heart of its connection to the planet. Destroy it and you'll stop the flow of energy. The creature will lose its power. Elena didn't hesitate. She turned to Titan, who was still standing tall, watching the ancient with an unwavering focus. Titan, we need you to create a diversion. Draw the creature's attention away from us. Titan's head shifted slightly, and his vibrating hum turned sharper, almost like a growl. He moved forward with deliberate purpose, charging toward the ancient. The creature, still locked in a trance-like focus on the crystal, momentarily turned its attention to the incoming challenge. With a deep, resonant roar, it lunged toward Titan. Elena and Julian rushed toward the crystal, hoping that Titan's intervention would buy them enough time to sever the connection. As the two forces collided, the chamber was filled with an earth-shaking sound, the roar of the ancient and the clash of Titan's formidable form. Meanwhile, Elena and Julian worked desperately to activate the disruptors, praying that they weren't too late. The countdown had begun, and the fate of Altheria Prime was hanging by a thread. The final stand. The clash between Titan and the ancient sent shockwaves throughout the chamber, the force of their collision shaking the very ground beneath Elena and Julian. The roar of the ancient reverberated like the rumble of an erupting volcano, while Titan responded with a fierce hiss, his mandibles snapping with incredible force. The massive Sandrunner king was doing his best to hold his ground against the colossal creature, but Elena knew time was running out. Every second mattered. We need to hurry, Julian shouted, his voice strained as he worked feverishly to configure the disruptor device. His hands moved with practiced precision, but the energy readings were unstable, flickering wildly, threatening to overload. This thing wasn't built to handle power on this scale. Elena was already on the move, glancing at the conflict between Titan and the Ancient, her heart in her throat. The massive creature's tail lashed, slamming into Titan and sending him skidding back, but Titan immediately retaliated with a vicious swipe of his claws, raking across the ancient's armored hide. Sparks flew and the creature screeched in rage. Yet it was clear that the ancient was at least as powerful as Titan, if not more so. "We don't have much time," Elena yelled again, her pulse pounding in her ears. The countdown on her own device flashed ominously, only minutes before the crystal fully activated, before the planet's energy coursed through the creature, turning it into an unstoppable force. "We can't fail?" Julian gritted his teeth as he continued to work the device. His brow was slick with sweat, his fingers trembling with the effort of overriding the crystal's energy patterns. "Almost there?" Elena took a step back from him, her gaze fixed on the shimmering crystal at the center of the chamber. Its pulsations were growing stronger, the glow intensifying with every heartbeat. It felt alive, like an immense heart-pumping power to the ancient, to the Sandrunners, to the planet itself. "Get back, Elena!" Julian shouted as he made the final adjustments to the disruptor. The device gave a loud beep, then hummed with power. "It's ready? Get clear now?" Elena didn't hesitate. She dove to the side, her eyes never leaving the crystal. At that moment, the entire cavern seemed to tremble with energy, the air thick with static. The harmonite veins in the walls pulsed more violently than ever, as if the planet itself was fighting to keep its secret. With a deep breath, Julian slammed his hand down on the final switch, and the device activated. For a moment nothing happened. Then the crystal shuddered. It was as though the heart of the planet had skipped a beat. A sudden blast of energy erupted from the device, sending a pulse of intense light through the room. The crystal began to crack, lines of radiant blue splitting across its surface as the energy destabilized. The glow of the chamber dimmed, flickered, then pulsed in a steady rhythm, like a dying heartbeat. Titan, hearing the pulse of the device, broke off from his battle with the ancient, his massive body pivoting to face the central crystal. The Sandrunners around him began to back away, their once synchronized movements faltering. The connection was beginning to sever. The ancient power source that had driven them was crumbling, and they could sense it. But the ancient was not so easily deterred. It let out a primal roar, a terrible bellow that shook the very foundations of the planet. It surged toward the crystal, its massive claws tearing at the ground as it advanced with terrifying speed, intent on stopping them before they could destroy its power source. "No!" Elena shouted, fear rising in her chest. She raised her rifle, taking aim at the massive beast, but the creature was moving too fast, too erratically. Every step it took seemed to cause the ground itself to quake. Titan, realizing the danger, surged forward in a last-ditch effort to protect the team. With a mighty roar, he charged the ancient, his powerful legs propelling him forward with a speed that seemed almost impossible for a creature of his size. He collided with the ancient once again, but this time it wasn't a contest of brute strength alone. Titan had become more than just a king of the Sandrunners. He was fighting for the very survival of Altheria Prime. The two beasts locked in a brutal contest, each one using everything at their disposal to overpower the other. Titan's claws lashed out, striking with deadly precision, while the ancient countered with savage strength, its jaws snapping dangerously close to Titan's neck. The force of their strikes sent tremors throughout the chamber, and the air itself seemed to shudder with the weight of their battle. Meanwhile, Elena and Julian watched in tense silence, their eyes fixed on the crystal. The disruptor's pulse was working. Slowly but surely the cracks in the crystal widened. Its glow faltered, the once bright energy now dimming and flickering. They only needed a few more moments. "It's almost there," Julian muttered, his eyes glued to the readings on his data pad. "Just a little longer?" Titan let out a fierce battle cry, pushing back against the ancient with an immense burst of power. The creature staggered, its massive frame shuddering as Titan tore into it with renewed ferocity. The ancient's body contorted in agony, its once unstoppable momentum now faltering. It swung its massive tail in a desperate attempt to strike Titan down, but the Sandrunner King was too quick, dodging the blow and retaliating with another devastating strike. In the chaos of the battle, Elena's focus remained fixed on the crystal, which was now beginning to crack apart at the center. The energy surging from it was flickering, unstable. One more push and it would shatter completely. "Now?" Elena shouted, her voice sharp as she turned to Julian. "It's time?" With a final, desperate cry, Julian activated the last command on the disruptor. A surge of energy shot through the chamber, a blinding light enveloping everything. For a moment, it felt as though time itself stood still. Then, the crystal shattered with a deafening roar, its once pristine surface breaking into millions of shards that scattered in every direction. The chamber was filled with a wave of energy, a pulse of raw power that knocked everyone off their feet. The ground shook violently as the energy dissipated, the light slowly fading. Titan, still standing tall, gave a final, guttural roar, his body vibrating with the remnants of the energy surge. The ancient, now without the crystal's power feeding it, staggered backward, its once mighty form faltering. It screeched in frustration, its movements becoming erratic, its strength waning. The Sandrunners, sensing the loss of the crystal's power, began to scatter, no longer held in thrall to the creature. They retreated, their once loyal connection to the ancient broken. The battle was over. For a long moment the chamber was still. The tremors faded and the air grew quiet. Elena could feel the weight of the silence press in on her as she picked herself up from the floor, her body sore and her ears ringing. "It's done," Julian said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. "We did it." Elena looked at Titan, whose glowing eyes met hers. There was a quiet understanding between them. The fight was over. They had saved Altheria Prime. But as she stood there, surveying the aftermath, Elena knew that the planet would never be the same. They had stopped one threat, but there was always another, one waiting just beyond the horizon. And in the depths of space, something else might be watching, waiting for the signal to be sent once more. A new dawn. The silence in the aftermath of the battle felt both oppressive and freeing. The once deafening roar of the ancient had faded into a dull hum, replaced by a steady, almost tranquil vibration within the heart of Altheria Prime. The crystal, now shattered, had ceased its ominous pulsing, leaving the chamber in a state of quiet devastation. The energy that once held the planet's power in a stranglehold had dissipated, leaving behind only the remnants of its former glory. Elena wiped the sweat from her brow, her hands shaking as the adrenaline slowly ebbed from her system. Her legs were weak beneath her, but she forced herself to stand, eyes scanning the room for any signs of movement. Titan, still standing tall, looked just as worn but no less regal. His mandibles clicked gently in rhythm with the fading hum of the chamber, but his massive form was unmoving, his gaze fixed on the now dark crystal that lay in pieces at the center. "Titan," Elena whispered, taking a step toward him. She felt a deep, quiet respect for the Sandrunner king. They had come so far together, through impossible odds, and now the enemy that had threatened their world was nothing but dust. "You did it? We did it?" Titan's eyes met hers. They glowed with an ethereal light, not unlike the dim remnants of the energy that still pulsed through the cavern walls. There was no need for words between them. Titan's victory was not just in the battle fought but in the deep bond forged between two races, humans and Sandrunners, who had once stood on opposite sides of a vast chasm of misunderstanding. The others were stirring now, pulling themselves to their feet. Julian, looking haggard but determined, moved to her side, his datapad still clutched tightly in his hands. The wreckage of the disruptor lay beside him, its components fried by the raw power they had unleashed to sever the connection between the ancient and the crystal. "I didn't think we'd make it out of this," Julian said, his voice heavy with relief but tinged with exhaustion. "For a while there, I thought the energy was going to rip us apart." "We almost didn't," Elena replied, her gaze drifting toward the far edge of the chamber where the final remnants of the Sandrunners were retreating, their bodies like shadows against the now settling dust. "But we did. And that's all that matters." As the last tremors of the chamber faded, Valuan approached, his once ceremonial cloak now torn and stained with the dust of the battle. His face was grim, his eyes reflecting the weight of the victory they had earned. "You did it," Valuan said, his voice hoarse but sincere. "You stopped it. The ancients, they were never meant to rise again. You've done something that even my people feared was impossible." "Then what now?" Elena asked. Her mind was already racing ahead, thinking of the future. The battle was won, but there were still questions, still uncertainties. What happens to Altheria Prime? Valuan's gaze swept the chamber, his eyes lingering on the scattered pieces of the crystal. "It will take time. The damage to the planet's energy systems is not irreversible, but it will be a long recovery. The Sandrunners, those few who remain, will retreat to their home cities and the Altherians will rebuild. But this victory," he paused, his expression darkening. "It may not be the end of the story. If the ancients could return once, they could return again. And what of the creatures from beyond the stars? What will they think of what we've done here?" Elena felt a chill run through her. The quiet peace of the moment seemed fragile now, like the calm before a storm. She had seen the signs, strange signals from the depths of space, artifacts that suggested they were not alone in the universe. The ancients had been just one piece of a much larger puzzle, one that stretched beyond the confines of Altheria Prime. What do we do about that? Elena asked, turning to Velun. The rest of the galaxy. We can't pretend that this is the only threat out there. Velun met her gaze. No, we cannot. And neither can the Sandrunners. The galaxy is vast, and the ancient beings that once ruled over it are not all gone. There are forces beyond our understanding, beyond our control. But we must prepare. We must become a united front, or we will fall. Elena nodded. She had always known the cost of peace. It was never permanent. The universe was filled with dangers, some known, some hidden. But for the first time in a long while, she believed that they had a chance. Not just to survive, but to shape their destiny, to carve out their place among the stars. Titan stepped forward, his massive legs moving silently over the rubble. He moved with purpose, a leader among his kind, and there was something in his gaze, a new understanding. The connection between the Sandrunners and the Altherians had been forever changed. They were no longer enemies but allies forged in the crucible of battle. We need to rebuild too, Elena said, her voice low but firm. This was just one world, one enemy. There's more out there and we can't do this alone. We won't be alone, Velun replied, his voice steady. The Sandrunners are a force to be reckoned with. And the Altherians have the strength to fight beside you. Together we will build a new future. Julian, having recovered his bearings, joined them, his eyes still lingering on the ruin of the crystal. We'll need more than just firepower. We need allies, information, strategies. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. I agree, Elena said, taking a deep breath. But for now we rest. We take a moment to recover because tomorrow we begin to rebuild. The weight of their words hung in the air. There was no turning back from this moment. They had changed the course of history and the consequences would ripple outward, affecting not just Altheria Prime but every world, every civilization that called the stars their home. As the team gathered their equipment and prepared to leave the chamber, Elena took one last look at the shattered remnants of the crystal. The energy that had once pulsed so brightly was now gone, leaving behind only the stillness. It was a haunting reminder of what they had faced and what they had won. But Elena knew that, in the grand scheme of the universe, this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and it had only just begun to reveal its secrets. The challenge now was not just to survive but to thrive, to rise above the darkness and create a future where they could control their own fate. And in the distance, beyond the star-streaked horizon of Altheria Prime, the faintest flicker of light appeared in the void. A signal, a message, perhaps even a warning. But whatever it was, Elena was ready to face it. Because now humanity had a place among the stars. And they were not about to let anyone, or anything, take that from them. The war was over. The real fight was just beginning. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.